How's it going today, guys? This is Dan with the Rapway Homestead, and today I'm going to do a quick video for you guys on how to replace your trailer wheel bearings. This is on a boat trailer, but the process is the same whether it's a boat trailer or a large like heavy equipment trailer. The bearings are obviously different size, but it's the same process, all the same thing. So if you've never done this before, it's something that can be kind of confusing, but it's really not that hard, and there's just a few little tricks. So let's get started. All right, so the first step is remove the tire. I have an air impact that I'll be using here, but if you don't have an air impact and you're using just a regular like a breaker bar or regular ratchet or something like that, it's easier if you have the wheel on the ground before you do that. So to break them loose, you don't have to try to hold it. But let you guys listen to this wheel here and the reason we're doing the wheel bearings. So you can hear it sounds like someone threw a handful of gravel in there. So let's get this wheel off. A little kick there to break it loose, but all right, we got our wheel off. All right, now the next step we're gonna have is to go ahead and remove this. These are the Bearing Buddy cap, but it'll be the same regardless of what style cap you have. Some are smaller, some are bigger. But what I do is I just take my hammer. If you have a rubber hammer, that's a little better, but and just kind of tap around the edge to break it loose. And as you go, you'll see it slowly working off. And there you go. There's your cap. It just is a press-in fit. Pounds right off. Not a problem. All right, so now that we have that cap removed, you can see it's all full of grease in here. You can see how loose and slopped out that is. But from now, what we're going to do is I like to lay a clean paper towel on the shop floor. Get this air hose out of our way. But lay a clean paper towel down on the shop floor right underneath your wheel bearing to set your parts out on. So let that guy there. And then take a second paper towel and just wipe the grease, all the grease you can off from around here. And what you'll see is a cotter pin. It's kind of hard to see, but here's the top of the pin right here, and here's the tab. So we'll need to remove that. Now, so here's a little trick. Instead of trying to use a needle nose, use a set of side cutters. Now you're not trying to cut that pin, but these work better for getting a hold of it. So we'll bend this top tab down. Okay, kind of tap it flat. You don't need to get it perfect, really, just until you can get a grip on, whoops. Kind of hard to do with the camera between me and the wheel bearing, but that's all right. Just kind of tap that guy up until you can grab a hold of this, which is the loop part on top. And then what you'll do is you'll kind of grab onto it with your side cutter like that and pry up until you slowly can work that pin out of there. And the wheel bearing kit will come with a new one of these, so you don't have to really worry about saving it. You're just trying to get it out of there. So there we go. There's our cotter pin removed. Put that on our paper towel underneath. Now the next thing is, this is a big giant nut here. And you may need to get like a channel lock, but as you can see, this one's loose. So what we'll do is I just take the end of my side cutter like this, as long as it'll cooperate, and just back that nut off. Now you'll notice that sometimes it'll kind of bind because there's a hole in there where that cotter pin went through. There's a hole going through the axle. But that's all you do. Back this guy off. The reason I just stick with using my side cutter is because, as you can see, your tools get very greasy and dirty doing this. And I am running a shop here, and the less tools I gotta clean up to put away, the faster I can get to my next job, and well, you know how it is. So once we get it to a certain point, we can take our paper towel here and get a hold of it and get it the rest of the way off. So there's that guy there. You can see it's got grooves in it, and that's where your cotter pin goes through. We'll have to line them up with the hole in the top of the axle when we go to reinstall. But there's one other part in here that you'll need to concern with right away, and there's a washer here that goes behind that nut. So from there, this just slides right off, just like that. Now we'll go up to the bench. All right, so from there, you can see our bearing here. It's very rusty looking. I don't know if it's picking up on camera, but it's very rusty. So we'll set that guy off to the side. On the back side here, there's a seal. And I have this seal puller right here. It's a longer handle deal for removing the seal. If you don't have one of these, you can use a flat blade screwdriver, pry bar, anything else you have. But this seal will just pry right out of here. If you have a vise, that can help a lot. And I do, but I'm just trying to film and show you that you don't need it. So there's your seal, came right out. Not a problem. Set that guy off to the side. Your kit will come with a new one. Another bearing on the back side of that. Remove that guy. Now, you can see that this is full of old, nasty grease. It's very important that we remove that old, nasty grease. So I'm going to go over the garbage can and just push paper towels through it, a little bit of brake cleaner, and try to clean it up the best you can. It don't have to be perfect, but you just got to get it, all that old junk out of there. Okay, you can see we got our grease cleaned up good enough. Now, what's hard to pick up on camera, but this right here, it goes all the way around, but this is a race, the bearing race, the outer race they call it. There's one on this side that bearing rides on, and one on this side, which again, I'm trying to get the camera to focus on, but there's one on that side. Now those are very important to remove when you install your new bearings. If you don't remove those, your new bearings will ride on the old race, and the pits that are in this old race will cause your new bearings to wear extremely fast. So they have to be replaced. So what I like to do is I move down to the floor, unless you have a really sturdy workbench, but the stainless top just isn't quite that sturdy. The concrete floor is a lot harder. So we'll move down to the floor and I'll show you how I pound them out. All right, so this can be the difficult part for some people, and it can just be the difficult part. Sometimes these pound out real nice, and sometimes I've had to actually cut them out before. So hopefully this one pounds out all right, but what I use is this pry bar. It's got an angle to it, so I'm able to kind of pry sideways on it. Once I get the race out, this will make more sense, but you can catch the back side of that race with your pry bar. If you don't have one of these, you can use a punch. You can also use a flat blade screwdriver, really anything that you can get in there on. Of course, if you use a flat blade screwdriver, you might wreck the screwdriver, so that's what we're gonna do here. I kind of step on the one side to hold it so I can put pressure and just pound her out. You gotta work it back and forth. If you just pound one direction, it will end up binding in there. So here we got it almost out. So then what I do is I take blocks of wood and set it up just so I can get it that last little bit. And that guy popped right out. So there's your race right here. And once again, that was just pounded right into the back side like that, and it removes. So there's one on the other side, and we'll go ahead and pound that one out next. I like to start it without the block of wood because that first little bit's the hardest, and this way it's got the floor to pound onto. These are pounding out much easier than they normally do. Normally they do not pound out this easy. We're getting kind of lucky on these ones, but there we go. So there's our second race. So we'll discard those. Them are no good anymore. So you can see here now that these races, they pound in until they seat right against that guy there. There's kind of a ledge on both sides that the races will seat on. So that's what we're doing. So next, we'll pound in. Well, first we'll clean it all up, make sure any of the gravel we just got on it is cleaned up. And then we'll install our new races. Okay, so one thing I should touch on, now that you got your bearings out, your races out, and your seal removed, you need to go to your parts store and get new bearings. So there's a number stamped in the back of the race that can be very hard to read. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but it's usually an LM or an L something. So this is an L, there you go, 44610. So you'll need to know that. The back of the bearing on the inner race of the bearing, this is called, will have the same type of number. Well, this one's really rusted up, but if you clean this up, you'll see a number stamped on the back side of that. And then also your seal. Now this seal has been painted, so you can't tell. What you'll need to do is measure the outside of the seal and the inside here to get your seal number. And the parts store can do that for you when you go to get your parts. But those are the things you're going to need. Now, if you're lucky, which should be able to, you'll get these kits. Now these kits, we know that this is a 1-inch wheel bearing kit. So in other words, a 1-inch shaft coming out of the trailer. The axle is a 1-inch. So you'll be able to look at that, and then what I do is it tells you right on the back here what size the bearing set, what size the race is. You get a cotter pin, dust cap, and your the seal. They call it a grease cap, but it's a seal. So we're able to get the kits. If you're able to do that, they're a whole lot cheaper. If you have a 1-inch straight axle, this is the part number if you want to run Parts Master. Doesn't really matter. So that's what we'll be using. So you might notice on your trailer that it has two different sized bearings and races. On heavier duty trailers, they have a tapered setup. That's when the back bearing and race is a lot larger than the outer. So that's something just to pay attention to. Again, the process is the same. It's just when you go to order or get your bearings, you'll need two different sizes because the shaft tapers. So next step here is to install the races. Okay, so here we've got our two brand new shiny races for this hub assembly here. And what I like to use to install them is a bearing race driver set. If you're going to be doing a lot of these, this is a very, very valuable thing to have. This is Blue Point brand. You can get whatever else you want. But let me show you how this works. So you open her up, you match up the proper driver with your race. So I know that this is this size here, and it fits perfectly in there. So when you drive it in, it's a lot easier to keep it nice and straight. And then it comes with the actual driver handle that goes on the back. And there's a whole bunch of different sizes. This is also very useful for installing your seal. So I recommend getting one. They're not horribly expensive. I think that one was $90-ish. And you'll use it a lot if you're going to be doing this type of stuff yourself on the homestead, which you will be. So that installs on there, and that guy sits on there. Now, you don't need this tool in order to do this. You can set this in here and carefully, very carefully, take a punch and slowly tap around this outside ring. The problem is if you nick this surface, that'll cause your bearing to go out. So it's very easy to nick that. Again, I would recommend getting the driver set, but you don't need it. Now, you'll notice there's a fatter part and a thinner part. In other words, this tapers to match the taper of the bearing. That's why they're called a tapered roller bearing. So this guy sits in here like this. This might make it more obvious. It does not fit like that. So you want to make sure that the thick part is down so you can drop your bearing in the top like this. So that's kind of how, it's kind of hard to show. That's how this assembly go together. This guy goes in, and this sits on top like that. So let's install it. Again, with this guy, fits right on. Set it on top. Grab your hammer. Wherever I hid my hammer. All right, now when you do this, it's important to make sure that this is nice and straight when you're starting. See, that's a little angled. So when I go to hammer it in, I want to make sure it's nice and straight. If you get them in there crooked, well, they won't pound in. You could damage the hub. So nice and straight, hold it firm and pound her in. You could hear the difference when it bottomed out there. You want to make sure it's all the way down. So you can see that new race is installed all the way nice and flush down. I'll flip it over and repeat the process on the other side. Drive her down. Again, you'll hear it soft, and then you'll hear it when it bottoms out. So there we go. There, your races are installed in your hub. All right, now the next step is to pack your wheel bearings. They make fancy bearing packers. I don't like them, so I don't use them. What I do is the old-fashioned way. So this is multi-purpose, just Valvoline grease, but what's important is to make sure it is rated for wheel bearings. So the reason is wheel bearings get hot, and you want something that's heat rated. If it's not heat rated, when it gets hot, it'll turn to a liquid and boil out your seal, and you'll be alongside the road. So this is the messy job. I put on black nitrile gloves just so you don't have grease packed in your hands for the rest of forever. So I just take a handful of grease like this, splat it out on your hand, set your bucket off to the side. Okay, so you want to just keep going, taking little bites like this until you see grease coming out the top. And this can be a long process. It takes a little bit of practice, I guess, but here you can see in between by the rollers there, grease is starting to push out the top. So you want to do that until it comes out all the way around the bearing. You just kind of work it like that slowly into the grease. Again, I like doing it this way versus the packers you put a grease gun on, because I can physically see, you can see the bumps of that grease oozing up in between each roller. I know for sure this bearing, when I'm done, is perfectly packed. Again, if you don't do this, your bearings won't barely last out of the driveway. So just working it around, keep going. It's kind of hard to get on camera, but you can see it oozing up through each one. Now, I like to take it, a fly stuck in there. I like to take it one step farther now that I've got it all around there, flip it, and repack the grease back the other direction to ensure it pushes any air bubbles out. This side usually doesn't take very long. A couple pushes and you can see it oozing up, you know you're good. All right, this one is done. So that didn't take too long. Set it off to the side. Grab your next one, do it again. Kind of rearrange your pile of grease there a little bit, but you can go pretty quick. You just, again, use kind of the palm of your hand as a force to push the grease up through the bearing. All right, now that you've got your bearings packed, what you're going to want to do is install them into your hub. Now, if you have a hub that has the thread-in style lug nuts, I guess you'd call, or lug bolts is what they'd be, you want to make sure that you know what side the wheel goes on, because the back side is where you'll need to put your seal. So this is the back side. And what we'll want to do is I like to take a fingerful of your same red grease, like this here, and run it on the inside of that race versus installing the dry bearing or your grease bearing into a dry race. Install that guy in there like that. Flip your bearing over, set it in like that. Now you want to take your seal, and your seal will pound in right like that over the top. Now what I like to do is I take my bearing race driver, once again, like we used to install, take the small one off, or the one that we used to actually install the races, and grab a larger one that's larger in diameter than the seal itself. So if you take your seal, lay it over the top, you can see it's larger. What this will allow you to do is when you pound it in, the driver will stop at the top of your hub and not press it too far in, and it also will make sure that it doesn't get crooked in there. If it's crooked, it's not going to seal right. And it's very easy to do with these very, very thin bearings. But what you want to do is, instead of putting it on like this, as if you were setting a race, you set it in the back way so it's just flat versus the taper. So go ahead and thread our bolt back in, holding that guy together. Again, if you don't have that, you can take anything flat to pound this in, even a chunk of wood laid over the top to pound it in, but I like to use this. So again, you want to get it started straight, line it up, hammer it down until you can't go no more on this, because when we do that, we know that it's perfectly flat across the top. Then you want to take another little bit of grease and run it on the inside of your seal here. Now, a lot of people don't do that, and what happens is the first time you drive it, that seal will heat up and melt. And the number one reason bearings go out is that seal melts and they get water and gravel in the backside into your bearings. So from there, flip it over. That side is done. Now what I like to do to save on grease out of your grease gun is I just take a bunch of grease and pack it down in. Now you don't want to completely fill it because you have to leave room for your axle shaft to go through. But I put a whole bunch of grease down in there, and that is greasing that race as well. Take your outer bearing, drop that guy in there, and that hub assembly is ready to go back onto the trailer. All right, so now we'll start the reassembly process, putting it back on the trailer. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you clean off this axle shaft here, and getting up here where the seal actually rides, or where it steps up is where your seal rides. You want to make sure you get all that clean. So a little bit of brake cleaner, doesn't take much. Give it a good wipe down, get all the junk off, clean up that sealing surface the best you can. Now this sealing surface is pretty rusted and pitted up, so what I'm going to do is take a little bit of Scotch-Brite to try to clean that. You're going to want to try to get that as smooth as you can again. If it's really bad, they make something called a ready sleeve, and that's a sleeve you press on over the top, and it gives that seal a new place to ride, but this one's not quite that bad. So just clean it up the best we can and call that good. So there we go. That's all cleaned up now. So then what you do is you slide this guy on with your new seal in. Now when the seal goes where it rides, you want to try to get it straight and kind of give it a little bit of a twist. You don't want to force it on because it can actually rip the seal lip there. So you'll go ahead and do that there. Then you'll clean up your washer that goes on next. Put that guy on. Again, this is messy, so. And then clean up your castle nut here the best you can. These are hard to clean up. Doesn't have to be perfect unless it's full of gravel or something, then it's got to be perfect. But just clean it up best you can, give it a good wipe down, and thread that guy on. All right, so for this part here, I like to use a ratchet with a socket. If you don't have a socket that's big enough, which a lot of people won't, you can use like a channel lock or something too, or whatever you might have, but I use a socket. So this part here, there's many different ways, but this is the way to do it. So you tighten her up, until you feel it make contact with the bearing. And then you go ahead and snug her down pretty good. And then spin, and then rotate this guy. And what you'll feel is it's tight right away, and it loosens up. What that's doing is that's allowing those bearings and those races to seat properly with each other. If that race is just a freckle crooked one way or the other, that bearing wasn't perfectly straight on that axle shaft, that's aligning everything. If you don't do this step where you tighten it down, you don't want to get really crazy, but snug her down good and give it some spins to seat everything. I kind of go back and forth like this, rotate it. If you don't do that, what'll happen is within 5-10 miles, when everything takes a set on its own, you'll end up with a lot of play in your wheel bearing, and that'll cause your wheel bearing to fail early. So that's what you want to do. So snug her down good, back and forth, and that's good. Now, what I do from there is I loosen it up. You don't want to leave it that tight. It'll make too much heat. And this is the part that's hard to explain. You just kind of go by feel and where the cotter pin lines up. So the hole in this axle is straight down on this one. So what I do is I just kind of loosen it up until it's completely backed off of that washer, and then tighten it back on until it's making contact, which you just have to feel with your wrench. I mean, you can feel as soon as it's, like you can see where the wrench just wants to stop. It just sits there. So from there, I go to the next notch tighter, if that makes sense. So in this case, it's going to be about 1/8 of a turn. Right about there is lined up. And that's perfect. That's what you want. Now, at times, you'll have to go too tight and you won't, or in order to get the pin in, or too loose in order to get the pin in. That's kind of a tough call to make. I typically, when that happens, I tend to side with the little bit tighter direction, assuming that the bearings will break in, because they will break in. I go with the slightly tighter way. However, if that is really tight, then you have to go the loose direction. It's one of those things that you can't make it perfect. You have to line the groove in that nut up with the hole through the axle shaft. So that's what we did. And from there, we'll go and install our new cotter pin. All right, so with any luck, we guessed where our hole was properly, which we did this time. So that's good, and you'll see that coming out the bottom here. And what you'll want to do again is take your set of cutters or whatever you're using and carefully just bend that up. I like to bend mine up until both tabs are in line with the axle. So I just take the back side of this guy and bend them up flush. Now, some axles have a grease zerk that are right in the middle. If yours has that, what you'll need to do is bend them off to the side. But in this case, it doesn't. It has a bearing buddy set up, so just bend it flat. Now from there, you'll take your bearing buddy cap, and you can see that's packed full of old nasty grease, so we got to get that out. So I'll go clean that up quick. All right, so we got our cap pretty cleaned up. So now we're going to go ahead and pound this on. You want to make sure you go nice and straight with this guy, and what I do is I just slowly tap around the outside of these. Just like that there. Now the next step is this. So these are bearing buddies, so they have a grease zerk in the end. I'll grab my high temp grease and put a few pumps of grease in there until you can see this guy push out a little bit. So again, this is using high temp wheel bearing grease. Just put a few pumps in there. You don't have to get crazy because you already filled it, but you'll see it start to kind of push out a little bit. And we'll call that good. And that's all there is to installing new wheel bearings on your trailer. Next step is obviously to go ahead and put that wheel back on, tighten your lug nuts in a cross pattern. These lug nuts I like to torque. I do not tighten anything with my impact. I'll chase the threads up with it, but I do not tighten it. you'll want to torque them. I like to torque steel lug nuts here to 100 foot-pounds. That's kind of a good round number. If you don't have a torque wrench, just snug them up good, and it should be good. I like to lower it on the ground in order to torque that so you can get a good torque reading on it, but that's how you do it. All right, guys, I hope them chicks aren't driving you nuts in the background, but so that's how you install wheel bearings on your trailer around the homestead. So this is something that anybody can do. You guys can handle it. Don't be intimidated by it. There's some special tools that I have because I do a lot of these every week. I'm probably doing a few sets of wheel bearings, so I have the tools to do it. But if you don't, again, like I described, you can get away with other tools that most people have in their garage or shop if you're going to go after a project like this. So if you enjoy this kind of content, this will go on our trailer series. Check out the diagnosing or checking your trailer lights without a vehicle video. And yeah, appreciate a like and a subscribe. And until next time, have a good one.